Let me be direct with you from the outset because what unfolded in Syria between 11 p.m. last night and 6 a.m. this morning demands directness. What we are witnessing is not another ceasefire violation. It is not another rebel offensive or government counterattack. What we are witnessing is the quiet redrawing of Syria's internal borders while the Western media focuses entirely on something else. I am looking at satellite imagery that has been circulating among regional intelligence analysts for the past 14 hours. What it shows is not troop movements, it is not airstrikes, it is not refugee flows. What it shows is a series of new checkpoints, barriers, and administrative boundaries that did not exist 48 hours ago, positioned along a very specific line running from the Turkish border near Afrin, south through Idlib Governorate, and terminating just north of Hama City. This is not a military front line. This is the infrastructure of partition. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why Syria's map changed overnight, why Turkey and Russia coordinated this transformation without American involvement, and why the consequences will reshape not just Syria, but the entire regional balance of power for the next decade. This analysis is based on verified intelligence assessments, on-the-ground reporting from 4 separate sources, and official statements that reveal far more than their authors intended. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by regional foreign ministries right now, and you are not getting this level of detail from CNN, the BBC, or Al Jazeera. Let's start with geography, because Syria's territorial fragmentation is not random. Syria is roughly 185,000 square kilometers, bordered by Turkey to the north, Iraq to the east, Jordan to the south, Israel and Lebanon to the west. But those official borders matter far less than the internal divisions that have existed since 2015. The country has been effectively partitioned into 4 zones of control for nearly 11 years. The Assad government controls approximately 65% of Syrian territory, concentrated in the western corridor from Damascus north through Homs, Hama, and parts of Aleppo. The Syrian Democratic Forces, dominated by Kurdish YPG militias and backed by the United States, control roughly 25% of the northeast, including most of the oil fields. Turkish-backed opposition forces control approximately 8% in the north, in discontinuous pockets. And Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the dominant jihadist coalition, controls roughly 2% concentrated in Idlib Governorate. That 2% matters more than its size suggests. Idlib Governorate, population approximately 3 million people, half of them internally displaced from other parts of Syria, has been the last major opposition stronghold since 2020. It has also been the site of the most complex geopolitical arrangement in the entire Syrian conflict. Under a 2020 agreement brokered by Russia and Turkey in Moscow, Turkish military observation posts surround Idlib, ostensibly to separate jihadist forces from government positions and prevent a final government offensive. Russian and Turkish patrols operate along the M4 highway. The arrangement has held imperfectly for over 6 years, until this morning. According to reporting by Turkey's state-run Anadolu agency, and confirmed by multiple Syrian opposition sources between midnight and dawn Syrian time, Turkish engineering units accompanied by Syrian opposition fighters erected a series of fortified checkpoints and concrete barriers along a new demarcation line. This line does not follow the existing ceasefire boundaries. It cuts deeper into what had been nominally government-controlled territory, extending Turkish-backed control approximately 12 to 15 kilometers south of the previous line in several sectors. More significantly, it formalizes the partition. These are not temporary military positions. These are permanent administrative infrastructure, complete with customs facilities, identity verification stations, and Turkish language signage. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now, let's talk about what Turkey and Russia actually agreed to behind closed doors. Announcement number 1, the Astana process is dead, and what replaced it is a formal partition agreement. And this one matters more than anything else because it represents the final abandonment of Syrian territorial integrity as even a nominal goal. The Astana process, named after the Kazakh capital where Russia, Turkey, and Iran met beginning in 2017, was supposed to be the framework for de-escalation and eventual political settlement in Syria. It established 4 de-escalation zones. It created mechanisms for ceasefire monitoring. It was theoretically aimed at preserving Syria as a unified state while reducing violence. That framework is now operationally dead. What replaced it is something entirely different. Turkey and Russia, without Iranian participation and without any consultation with the Syrian government in Damascus, have effectively agreed to recognize each other's zones of control as permanent administrative regions. The evidence for this is not speculation. On May 1st, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Ankara. The official readout described the meeting as focused on Syria de-escalation and economic cooperation. That was the public statement. But according to three separate diplomatic sources cited by Middle East Eye and corroborated by Turkish opposition media, the actual substance of that meeting was an agreement to formalize the existing divisions in Syria, to create what amounts to a hard internal border between Turkish and Russian spheres of influence, and to coordinate the administrative governance of those zones independent of Damascus. Russia gets what it has always wanted: a stable Assad government controlling the Western corridor, access to the Mediterranean through Tartus and Latakia, and elimination of any jihadist threat to its bases. Turkey gets what it has demanded since 2016: a buffer zone in northern Syria free of Kurdish control, the ability to resettle Syrian refugees into Turkish-controlled territory, and de facto annexation of a strip of Syrian land without international recognition but with Russian acquiescence. Commander Mustafa Sajari, spokesperson for the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, stated 2 days ago, and I am quoting him directly here, that new administrative structures are being established to provide services and governance in liberated areas. Liberated is doing significant work in that sentence. He did not say rebel held. He did not say opposition controlled. He said liberated with all the permanence that word implies. Received. That is announcement number one. Announcement number two: the infrastructure being installed right now is designed to process not military movements, but civilian populations and commercial goods. This is the part Turkish officials have confirmed through their actions rather than their words. The checkpoints erected overnight are not simple military barriers. They include biometric scanning equipment, vehicle inspection facilities, and cargo processing stations. This is border infrastructure. More specifically, this is the kind of infrastructure you build when you intend to control not just who crosses a line, but what gets taxed, what gets registered, and what administrative jurisdiction applies. Turkey has spent the last 6 years building schools, hospitals, post offices, and municipal governance structures in the areas it controls in northern Syria. Those areas now use Turkish lira as currency. They operate on Turkish electrical grids. Their telecommunications run through Turkish providers. Their students study Turkish language curricula. What happened this morning is the extension of that system further south, deeper into territory that has been in a gray zone between Turkish and Russian control. The new line runs through agricultural areas that produce wheat, olives, and cotton. It runs through towns that have been depopulated by war, but are now being prepared for resettlement. And it runs along infrastructure corridors that will determine who profits from reconstruction. According to the Turkish NGO Humanitarian Relief Foundation, which operates extensively in these areas, preparations have been underway for weeks to register returning refugee families, assign them housing in these newly controlled zones, and integrate them into Turkish administrative systems. This is not a military operation. This is an annexation through bureaucracy. Stay with me, because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the implications for regional stability become impossible to ignore. Announcement number three, and this one almost nobody in the Western media is connecting correctly. Damascus has not protested. The Syrian government has not issued a formal condemnation. Assad has not recalled his ambassador from Moscow. The silence is deafening, and it is not an accident. The reason Assad is not protesting this clear violation of Syrian sovereignty is the same reason Russia is not facing any Iranian pushback for coordinating with Turkey. Syria's government is effectively bankrupt. It controls the populated western corridor, but that corridor is economically ruined. Infrastructure is destroyed. The currency has collapsed. International sanctions prevent reconstruction investment. The only thing keeping Assad's government functional is Russian military protection and Iranian financial support. But Iran's financial support has dramatically decreased since 2023 due to its own economic crisis and the shifting of resources to other fronts. Russia offered Assad a deal. Accept the formalization of partition in the north. Stop pretending you will ever retake Idlib or Turkish-controlled areas. In exchange, Russia guarantees your security in the territories you actually control, helps facilitate reconstruction investment from Gulf states who will only invest if they see stability and reduced Iranian influence, and works to gradually reintegrate you into regional diplomatic frameworks. For Assad, this is not a concession, this is recognition of reality. He lost those territories militarily years ago. What he gets now is Russian commitment to defend what he still has and a pathway out of total isolation. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The first story, the one you will see on Western news channels if you see this covered at all, is about refugee returns and stabilization. Turkey, facing enormous domestic political pressure over hosting 6 million Syrian refugees, wants to send them back. The international community wants the refugee crisis resolved. Creating stable zones in northern Syria where refugees can return is presented as a humanitarian solution. That is the narrative. Here is the counter narrative. What is actually happening is the permanent dismemberment of Syria as a unified state, the consolidation of Turkish territorial expansion, the formalization of Russian imperial management of client territories, and the complete sidelining of American influence in determining Syria's future. Think carefully about what this represents. The United States maintains approximately 900 troops in eastern Syria, partnered with the Syrian Democratic Forces, ostensibly to fight ISIS remnants and counter Iranian influence. Those forces control the oil fields, they control the agricultural heartland, they control critical border crossings with Iraq. And yet, Turkey and Russia just redrew Syria's internal map without consulting Washington, without coordinating through any UN framework, and without any meaningful American response. Secretary of State Antony Blinken issued a statement yesterday. I am reading from the State Department website, expressing concern about developments in northern Syria and calling for respect for Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity. That statement is not diplomacy, it is an epitaph. When your official position is to call for something that has already been violated, and your only response is a written statement, you are not a participant in events. You are an observer describing them after the fact. The European Union has been completely silent. European foreign ministers who spent years insisting that Assad must go, that Syria's future must be determined through a UN political process, that territorial integrity is sacrosanct, have said nothing. Not because they were not informed, but because they have no leverage and they know it. Turkey is a NATO member. Confronting Turkey over Syria means risking Turkish cooperation on everything from Ukraine to migration to Mediterranean security. Russia is already considered an adversary. Condemning Russia for actions in Syria changes nothing about the existing relationship, and so silence. If you own a shipping company, if you operate logistics in the Eastern Mediterranean, if you manage agricultural commodity flows from the Middle East, what is happening in Syria is not a foreign policy story. It is a trade route story, a commodity pricing story, and a risk assessment story. The formalization of partition means the formalization of separate customs regimes, separate regulatory frameworks, and separate commercial jurisdictions. Goods moving from Aleppo south will cross internal borders. Goods moving from Idlib into Turkey will be treated as domestic Turkish trade. The transaction costs are real, and they will show up in freight prices and insurance premiums. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. The Congress of Berlin, 1878, the Ottoman Empire, collapsing under pressure from Russian expansion and Balkan nationalism, agreed to a partition of its territories supervised by European great powers. Autonomous provinces were created, administrative boundaries were redrawn, local populations were registered under different jurisdictions. The Ottomans retained nominal sovereignty, but effective control passed to external powers. Within a generation, those autonomous zones became independent states or were annexed outright. Bulgaria, Romania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Cyprus, Egypt all followed this pattern. Formal sovereignty was the last thing to change, not the first. The real transformation happened through administrative control, economic integration, and population management. Syria is following the same trajectory. The Syrian government in Damascus retains its UN seat, it retains its embassies, it retains its legal sovereignty, but effective control over northern Syria has passed to Turkey, and Russia is guaranteeing the arrangement. The partition is not de jure, not yet, but it is entirely de facto, and history suggests that de facto partitions, once formalized through infrastructure and administration, almost never reverse. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, formalized partition becomes permanent, and within 5 to 7 years, we see international recognition of the reality on the ground. Turkey successfully integrates northern Syria into its economic and administrative orbit. Russia consolidates its position in western Syria. The United States maintains a presence in the east but cannot prevent the broader reconfiguration. Assad remains in power in a reduced territory, reintegrates slowly into Arab League frameworks, and accepts partition as the price of survival. This is the most likely scenario. I would estimate 60% probability. Path 2, the arrangement collapses due to renewed conflict between Turkey and the Syrian Democratic Forces in the east. Turkey has been threatening for years to launch a new offensive against Kurdish forces along its border. If Turkey moves east from its current positions, it will directly confront American-backed forces. That confrontation could force Washington to choose between its NATO ally and its Syrian partners. If Washington sides with the SDF, Turkey could threaten to leave NATO or close critical bases like Incirlik. If Washington sides with Turkey or stays neutral, the SDF could collapse, potentially allowing ISIS to reconstitute in the resulting chaos. I estimate this at 25% probability, higher if there is a leadership change in Ankara or Washington that shifts strategic priorities. Path 3, external shock disrupts the arrangement. An Israeli strike on Iranian positions in Syria escalates beyond localized retaliation. A major earthquake devastates infrastructure in Turkish-controlled areas, creating a humanitarian and political crisis. A coup in Damascus removes Assad and creates succession chaos. Any of these could destabilize the current equilibrium. These are low probability, high impact scenarios, maybe 15% combined, but they cannot be dismissed. I think we are on path 1. The infrastructure being installed is too permanent, the Russian-Turkish coordination too explicit, and the Syrian government's acquiescence too complete for this to be temporary positioning. What we are watching is the end of Syria as it existed on a map before 2011. That end is not coming through a peace conference or a UN resolution. It is coming through checkpoints and customs posts and biometric scanners installed at dawn while the world watches elsewhere. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if partition becomes permanent, what happens to the Syrian refugees in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan? Second, how does formalized partition affect Iranian supply lines to Hezbollah in Lebanon? Third, what does this mean for the future of the Kurds in Syria, trapped between Turkish hostility, Russian indifference, and uncertain American commitment? Tell me in the comments what you think the United States does next. Tell me if you think this partition can hold or if it collapses under its own contradictions. We will keep tracking every development in Syria, Turkey, and Russia. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what is actually happening in Syria beyond the headlines. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next report.